This is the Justifiable Noise Project podcast. I'd like to say welcome to everybody that is joining the stream. My name is Andre. If you are new, welcome. If you're coming back for another dynamic stream, hopefully very informative, I'd like to say thank you for joining me and joining the community. Uh, we have a four-part series that is up and coming, and I wanted to give some insight into what I would like to say is a project that is long time coming, long time for many, many reasons, but most importantly, I'd like to say that I hope that I got it right, that it's providing all the proper insight for those that need it. So let's talk about it. As a youngster, I always would hear fellow relatives and friends of the family that would always give my mom certain accolades. Uh, and they were all about her being a midwife. Now, by that being said, I was very young at that time. I had no idea what a midwife. All I know, it sounded that it was very interesting, and I was really into school, baseball, hanging out with friends whenever they let me before the sun would go down. But most importantly, it wasn't something that I really said, hey, hey mom, what's a midwife? Or asked my sister Gina. It's like, what does that all mean? Not that I didn't care, it just didn't move me. But I do know that everybody really, when they mention that, my mom, who was a registered nurse, but they specifically always, at times I hear people talk about her being the midwife, and the way they said it, it was held with such high esteem. My mom was a registered nurse from the time that she left the West Indies, and then was in Great Britain, and then eventually here in the United States. And as I said, she was also a midwife. However, I didn't realize the pivotal role that midwives played in the prenatal and postnatal care that women and their families drastically need. I had no clue, as I mentioned before. Uh, Now, the podcast isn't about my mother, but it does allow me to look back then at things that I would hear at times and why that term midwife was so important to so many individuals, whether it be her friends that were nurses or not in the healthcare industry, my aunts, uncles, whomever it may be. Uh, that being said, however, the podcast will discuss why women of African descent and Hispanic descent should consider incorporating a midwife, a doula, to make sure that they have an obstetrician, gynecologist, aka OBGYN, and maybe even a psychologist, depending on the situation, and having someone that looks just like you, and it's from maybe your same culture, because what we're going to talk about, really in the podcast are certain biases. And biases, if you don't know what the bias is in the healthcare industry, that's definitely there. Although individuals do take certain oaths to live up to, just like many people in other industries or just in every walks of life. You like to say everybody follows the golden rule, and they like to do what's right by their fellow person. Unfortunately, here in the US and other places for that fact, but I'm speaking specifically here in the US, people do have biases. And in the medical field, specialists that we rely on from in our time of need, they too have biases. These biases can be unconscious or can be done consciously by medical professionals. Basically, factors that contribute to these implicit biases are people's backgrounds, personal experiences, societal experiences, cultural context, in addition to, let's say, gender, diversity, height, weight, names. Their names are just a few things, or their economic and social backgrounds. One would say, why would someone say, someone's race would really come into place, or even just their gender, their height, their weight. Well, have you ever heard of the situation? Well, he's strong, he can bear it. She's strong, she can bear it. I can definitely tell you, not ever being pregnant, because that's not the scenario, but I've definitely have had doctors that have had biases where I've had surgeries and I didn't feel just right, and I was sent home and just told to take an aspirin, and next thing I know, I have a fever, which led to an infection, which ended up having me go to the emergency room and then back to another specialist that I really felt comfortable with to redo and look at the procedure that was done. And no one wants to be in that situation. So it's unfortunate that people can have these unconscious and or conscious biases. Some would say these biases are only attributable to wealth or the lack thereof. I'd like to say my best Maury Povich impersonation, that's a lie. You know, there have been several wealthy people. If we go back to, let's say, around 2011, where you had someone such as Serena Williams. Now, I don't always like to bring up, entertainers or people of wealth, but if you can then see that even she, during that time that she was in childbirth, and she was complaining about how she was feeling at that time, and the doctors and healthcare professionals were not listening to her. And basically, she could have died during that time had she not had uh, the tenacity to push forward and say, "No, I need this care. I'm feeling like something is going on within my body." And in that case, it could have threatened her life and maybe even the child that she was having. In the U.S., there are certain system, I like to say systemic and structural healthcare biases. Just in general, there's structural and systemic racism that goes on throughout the country in so many different ways. Uh, I call it racism. Some people will call it biases. You can flip it however you like. But most importantly, the fact is that it does happen. One doesn't have to look any further than during the time of the highlight or the heightening breakout of COVID. And if you look during that time, you had more people of African descent and Hispanics die during that time. If we look at the CDC report, people of African descent and Hispanics were infected and also died at a rate of 2 to 1 versus their Caucasian peers. So if we really deep it and stick on the topic of childbirth, the infant mortality rate in the United States is approximately 5.48. That means about 5.5 deaths per 100,000 live births, and that was in 2023 per the CDC. In the U.S., from 2019, the infant mortality rate for people of African descent was 10.5, and Hispanics 4.8, compared to Caucasians at 4.4. And that's per the March of Dimes, who also gets this information from the CDC. Mind you, at this time in the U.S., women and their loved ones are losing their rights to choose if they have, if they want to have a child, how they want to have a child. When I say how, looking at legislation, whether it be for if you're thinking about having abortion or having in vitro fertilization, or just having a child. But most importantly, you have legislation that is being permeated throughout various states, and there was precedent there. and I won't go too much into politics at this point in time, but there's precedent there prior to the federal court, Supreme Court, changing that precedent. Although most of the judges that voted against the precedent said, "Hey, there's precedent when they were brought in front of Congress before they were voted in. They said there was precedent and there was no reason to change precedent. But they did just the opposite. And that's why they were actually nominated by, such parties. That being said, we definitely, in one sense or another, we do live in what I call dystopian times. Dystopian times where you're basically kind of looking at, the laws that are being rolled out. You kind of makes you feel like it's the end of the world. Also, the U.S. does not have what I looked at and have always heard of family paid leave for parents. So parents in the sense of, if you're having a child, it's unpaid family leave, unless for some particular reason you have a job, you have an employer, or if you're self-employed for that fact, where they have their own rule where it says, hey, we're going to make sure that if you're having a child, whether it be the mother, the father, or however it's structured in that sense, you're going to be able to have that time off and it will be paid. But in general, here in the United States, the country does not have it. Laws have been brought up many times, but no. We look amongst some of the top 41 countries throughout the world, the United States is at 0. It is the worst behind some of the best. If I look at some countries such as Japan, Germany, Italy, Chile, Mexico, Estonia, I don't want to digress, but if Estonia, has paid leave care for parents, the U.S. should have that. You shouldn't sit there and create that you're this beacon of the best, the democracy, the right to choose, the right to do this, the right to have the best health care, or you have this grandiose wealth, but you can't take time off. You have to basically just, leave and go on an unpaid leave. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. But let's get to the crux of the matter. I hope that this paints a picture of what our podcast will entail. It's a four-part series, pardon me, and it will be called Reproductive Justice. Part 1 is where we feature a non-fiction story about a couple. The gentleman's name that I interview is Bruce Mc Intyre III, and his loved one is Amber Rose Isaac, the late Amber Rose Isaac, who lost her life during childbirth at the tender age of 26 in 2020 at Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx, New York, where she gave birth to Elias. So she did have her child, and I don't want to go into the details here, but you want to definitely, it's a very profound interview, and I believe everybody should listen to the interview for the mere fact, not that you've already had children, but you may have children who are having children. You may have grandchildren that are having children. You may have friends, associates. So it's very important that you hear about what disparities we do have at this point in time. But beyond the disparities, I then said, let's look at how, to highlight things that could help, in the future, and there are things that, in speaking to Bruce Mc Intyre, that, I then said, let's not just do his story, but yeah, he's talking about, the doulas, the midwives, the OBGYNs. And I mentioned the psychiatrist just for the main thing is that you do have issues after childbirth, or maybe even during childbirth. So my most important thing that I did during this series was to make sure that I found women of color to interview. And I thought that that was very important. So from, let's say, featured in part two, we have two healthcare specialists, Dr. Tia Welsh, who is an OBGYN here in the New York City area. She's the chair of obstetrics and get that out, gynecology, gynecology for our Valley Healthcare Systems in New Jersey. And then also having Dr. Karinn Glover. She's a board certified psychiatrist who focuses on health equity in the workplace and mental health and collaborative care in the New York City area. Each doctor basically will discuss their roles as healthcare professionals, give testimonies of healthcare disparities, and the importance of families of color aligning themselves with professionals such as themselves that share the same values and can listen and understand a family and the family's needs during pregnancy. So whether that be pre-care or post-care. Part 3 and part 4 will feature the importance of incorporating trained professionals such as a doula and midwife. Our guest in part 3 will be Miss Lakesha Quarles. She is a doula and the owner of Sunflower Births, LLC, out of Greenville, South Carolina. And then we have an RN, who is Miss Dana Sledge. She is also a midwife, and she is out of Southern California. So just to wrap things up, this is just the intro. I hope that you enjoy part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And then also, yes, I want your feedback. That's always great. But most importantly, share this information with your loved ones, as I said. This is a labor of love. I want to thank everybody that allowed me into their lives, from Bruce Mc Intyre III, Dr. Tia Welsh, the OBGYN, Dr. Karinn Glover, the psychiatrist, our doula and midwife, let's say doula, Lakesha Quarles, and also Dana Sledge, the RN. But most importantly, also, I thank my mom because as I've gotten older, my mom passed away many years ago. And yes, I appreciated everything she did, but I still gained insight into the healthcare field where she worked and the understanding the importance of what she did and how she helped individuals on a daily basis. And I also, also dedicate this to one of my friends, Miss Ayanna Elmore. Ayanna, had her first child a few years ago, and I know she definitely, dealt with various issues, postpartum issues, and I'm sure that she's comfortable in me saying, hey, I always looked at her, her being a very strong individual, and never thinking that I had my own stereotypes of who I thought would have these postpartum issues. But it can virtually be anyone. It can be anyone. And, if we go back to Bruce Mc Intyre and the third and what he had, the trials and tribulations of what he has gone through, definitely, it allows you to see that someone such as himself can deal with PTSD from going through such trauma with his loved one. So again, I hope that you enjoy the podcast. You find it very informative. And again, my name's Andre with Justifiable Noise. I hope that you enjoy Reproductive Justice. Stay well until the next time we speak.